everyone and welcome back to the Bare Threads. This is actually a book review for my non-fiction read for August that I just finished a few days ago, called What White People Can Do Next, From Allyship to Coalition by Emma Dabiri. It's a short book, but it's going through some really complex, interesting, thought-provoking ideas, and I did start tabbing them all and then I ran out of tabs, so I just carried on reading it. But yeah, there's quite a lot packed in here that's quite thought-provoking and quite interesting. So the title, she says in the book, is designed to be very sort of instructive, helpful, what white people can do next, but also intentionally provocative. And she did apparently get criticised as being racist for the use of the word white, because as she says in the book, white people don't really like to acknowledge their whiteness. For me though, I didn't really pick up on that because I just thought it was exactly what I needed to read after going on an EDI, or Equality, Diversity and Inclusivity or Inclusion training day for work, where we started to discuss a lot of those ideas, and then the question is, well, what do you do next? And I thought, well, this is exactly what I need to read. And like I said, it's a short book, which is always really appealing as well. So she has some really interesting ideas that actually are different to things that I've heard elsewhere in regards to what we're supposed to be doing in terms of allyship and you know, tackling racism. So she talks about the idea that the concept of race, the black and white races, were invented to create racist beliefs. And I'm struggling a bit to get my head around that, because then I don't really know what language to use and how to describe people and how people describe themselves if being white and being black is a kind of socially constructed characteristic in the same way that gender identity is socially constructed. But then I suppose I can acknowledge that gender identity is socially constructed and still describe myself as being a woman, so maybe that's how that works. But so she talks about in 1676 in Virginia, an Englishman led a rebellion, or a coalition of Africans and also other English workers, and it was a rebellion to challenge the inequality and the unpaid labour that they were suffering from. There was he had a lot of support, it sounds like, but it was ultimately unsuccessful. But it did scare the ruling elites, and they wanted to make sure that it wouldn't happen again. So they ultimately sort of created a new social status, and this was a white identity, which would distinguish white Europeans, the white European sort of settlers and indentured workers, from the enslaved Africans, and then also consolidate all of the Europeans across the different class lines. And she says that that white identity gives white people this sense of superiority, but also distracts them from the very real oppression and hardships that they also face. So I think that's all really interesting. And then she talks about how this was kind of built into some of the laws and the slave laws and things that they had at the time. Obviously there's a little bit more explanation in the book, and obviously you could read more if you read a history of America or the Atlantic slave trade, but I did just think that she's coming at it from a different perspective than a straightforward history text would probably look at it. But she does reference other authors, so they might be people to read in the future. There's just so many people on my to read list, it's really difficult. So the book is From Allyship to Coalition, and she does talk about the dangers of allyship, that it would potentially be a form of the white saviour, who is a martyr willing to give up their privilege to help the less fortunate black character. That is still based on a hierarchy of the races and that white superiority, which is why she's wanting to move us to coalition. So coalition, she says, is about identifying shared interests and then working with those as a goal. So she gives the example of the Black Panthers, who developed a coalition called the Rainbow Coalition between the Black Panthers, the Puerto Rican Young Lords and a group called the Young Patriots, who were a group of white working class people in the South. And their shared interest they identified was to tackle racism, police brutality and inequality caused by capitalism. And so that would benefit all of them, but then obviously it still is identifying racism as a key part of that. I think again that's quite interesting and difficult to kind of figure out in my head how that works. If you just look at shared interests, I think the danger is that issues that only or mostly affect a certain group within a broader coalition might get overlooked, and I think that is kind of a danger of this. So you have to really be, I suppose, you have to be genuinely wanting to change things for everybody, wouldn't you? And it's shared interest, not just your interest. So yeah, and that mentioned about the inequality of capitalism. So she does have a chapter or a section on capitalism. So what she says about capitalism is that it's pervasive. So it's in every part of our lives, and that exploitation and inequality are the operating logic. So racism can flourish very easily within the capitalist system. And she talks about how a lot of existing activism is to try, if you call it activism, is to try and make capitalism, the capitalist system or capitalist society, more inclusive and more diverse, which at best is just going to change the look of the people at the top, or it changes the people at the top, but it doesn't change the system, and it doesn't dismantle what is an inherently unequal, exploitative system. And I agree with all of that, but again, it's sort of like, well, how do we do that? You know. And then she does also, in the book, she talks about the importance of reading, and reading non-fiction as well as fiction, and also music and dance. And she talks about not just relying on Google, and I have to say, like, that is something that I have heard before about how, well, we shouldn't be using individuals to teach us and train us. So we shouldn't just be going up to black people and expecting them to educate us on their experiences, but also what we can do to you know, change things or improve the world. We should be, you know, Google is your best friend, we should just be Googling it. But obviously if you Google stuff, you get just a load of nonsense and stuff, you know. You don't necessarily get very useful or accurate information. So she says reading and reading non-fiction as well can be really illuminating. And I have definitely found that non-fiction books written by non-English authors, set in countries outside the UK, with, you know, lives and characters and communities that look totally different to my own, has been very illuminating and educating. And I need to keep doing that. Again, so many books to read. And then she also does talk about her experience growing up as a black girl and woman in Ireland at the time when she was growing up, how that differed to her experience of living in America and her experience living in London. And so she does weave in her own personal history as well. So like I said, she does pack a lot into quite a short book, and I really did think it was really interesting. It says that she's the acclaimed author of Don't Touch My Hair, which apparently, it says on the back, takes us from pre-colonial Africa through the Harlem Renaissance, Black Power, and onto today's natural hair movement to show how black hairstyling culture can be understood as an allegory for black oppression and ultimately liberation. And I think that sounds very interesting. So that is going to have to be added onto my to-read list as well. Anyway, so that was what white people can do next. Like I said, thumbs up, very interesting. Let me know what you think in the comments. And please give me a like and a subscribe.